This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, 1967, the UCLA Bruins are on their way to an undefeated season, a national championship, absolute dominance of college basketball throughout that era. This was for a few reasons, but one of the big ones was Lew Alcindor, who would soon change his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. A dominant force like basketball had never really seen before, 7'2", setting scoring records and changing the game from the moment he arrived on campus, still just a teenager. Alcindor did a lot of things that no one else could, and one of those that he did regularly was dunk. It was a relatively novel move at the time, and now it is a signature part of basketball, the dunk. But at the time, people freaked the heck out, especially old white people. The old guard of college basketball, in fact, banned the dunk after Alcindor started using it. There is larger context here, of course, 1967. Such a heated time in politics, race relations, society in general. We've done tons of episodes about 1967, 1968, so it is impossible to see this story of the dunk ban as anything but a political one. So let's talk about it through that lens. We are going to call this our March Madness episode because we are indeed hurtling towards this year's college basketball tournament, so this counts as our sports episode. But here, as always, to discuss, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode is Mike Sielski, a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer who has written a number of books about basketball, and the new one is called Magic in the Air: The Myth, the Mystery, and the Soul of the Slam Dunk. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
And we should get this out of the way. I am a Philly sports fan. My dad grew up in Philadelphia. So I've read your work for a long time and still living in the glow of the Eagles championship. So go Birds. Very exciting.
Go Birds.
You're not the only one there, Jody.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Glow is a very generous phrase.
Celebrating all year.
Exactly. And, we don't have to talk about Philadelphia basketball at the moment, which is causing me lots of heartache. But let's talk about the dunk ban. And I think listeners know I worked on a series a couple years ago about sort of basketball changing in the 70s and into the 80s and the way it reflected kind of larger sociological and political changes. And I bring that up because, Mike, there was a moment in there where we kind of were just writing a little backstory about the dunk and about changing basketball. And we kind of dashed off this line about they tried to ban dunking in the late 60s. And we moved on because it is kind of this sort of understood thing that sports fans sort of dash off. And then we had this moment in an editorial meeting where we're like, wait a minute, stop and actually think about that. Stop and actually think about that move. They banned dunking as soon as Lew Alcindor started to do it. So take us to that moment, 67. What does the freak out look like? What is the decision and the justification to actually ban dunking? Well, how does it all go down?
So, Jody, you mentioned context, and let's stick to college basketball for a minute. At the time, there was this entity called the National Basketball Committee in the United States that was kind of the governing body for high school and college basketball. And there had been a slow, maybe slow is the wrong word, but a build to this over time, right? You had more and more players kind of bubbling up to the surface from the cities and playgrounds throughout America. Wilt Chamberlain comes from Overbrook High School in West Philadelphia to Kansas and then the NBA. Bill Russell comes from the University of San Francisco to the Celtics. You have more and more playground players and more showmanship, and to be frank, more and more black players coming to dominate college basketball. And that kind of reaches a crescendo in 1966 when Kentucky, coached by Adolph Rupp, reaches the championship game and is presumed to win the championship game and then loses to Texas Western, which is the first team to start 5 black players. And in the early part of that game, it's kind of an immortal moment in college basketball. The Texas Western coach, Don Haskins, tells his biggest, strongest player, David Lattin, As soon as you get the ball down low for the first time, I want you to dunk it in the face of one of the Kentucky players. Very short team. Kentucky's a very short team, an all-white team. Their best-known player is a guy you may have heard of named Pat Riley. So Latin does exactly that. He dunks the ball early in the game. It gives Texas Western its first lead. They go on to win the game, and Adolph Rupp is incensed. He didn't like the dunk anyway, and he particularly didn't like the fact that 5 black guys were doing it a lot to beat his team in the national championship. So all that is a precursor to what happens in 67, where Rupp is lobbying to get rid of the dunk. He's not the only one. There have been a lot of coaches doing the same thing. And a couple of administrators kind of out in the open basically say, hey, now that Alcindor is here and nobody can stop him, he's the most dominant force college basketball has ever seen, we have to get rid of this dunk to maintain balance in the sport. God forbid the sport become one where every basket is scored by a dunk. And there are other reasons given. Oh, it's the safety of the players. You know, we can't have backboard shattering and rims breaking and all these kinds of things. And even people who are operating in good faith in justifying the ban don't stop to think of the disproportionate effect that this is going to have on black players throughout the sport. And there's, as you said, Jody, there's just no way to disconnect this decision from the fact that this wave of black players is entering basketball and really taking it over.
And there does seem to be some kind of older set of racist tropes that it's tapping into with that idea. Well, this is a move of brute force rather than elegant, skillful play. I think the way that those two are juxtaposed against one another feels very racist in this moment.
Absolutely. It plays into all these tropes about black men and being aggressive, and even the look of the play itself almost looks like you're punching down on something, you know. And so I think all of that feeds this aesthetic of black men being either violent or aggressive or intimidating.
Yeah, and the irony of all that is that Alcindor / Abdul-Jabbar was one of the most elegant players to ever play basketball. If anything, dunking the ball stripped him of some of his grace. I mean, we think of him as using the sky hook, which was this unstoppable shot that there's kind of a wives' tale that he learned the sky hook because he was prevented from dunking the ball. That's actually not true. He had learned it well before the ban went into effect. But yeah, all of that is in play here. I mean, as you guys hinted, like it's 1967. Think about what's going on in the country.
To that point, is there, I'm just hung up on the kind of justification or the self-justification of all of this. I mean, you sort of hinted at even people who were operating good faith. I mean, do you see any sort of good faith or do you see any sort of rational explanation or justification or even understanding of why they would implement this rule? Or was it really all just twisting themselves into knots to basically say we want to keep dominant black players at bay as much as possible?
I think there's plenty of not twisting going on, Jody. Absolutely. I will say this as kind of a caveat. There had been a strong sense since the formation of basketball, since the creation by Dr. James Naismith, that there was supposed to be a quote-unquote gentlemanly aspect to the sport. But by the time the mid-50s into the 60s are rolling around, you have so many young athletes who are learning the sport on the playgrounds in the cities of America that this is a wave that they're trying to stop. It's just going to crash all over their heads, and they don't see it. So certainly with respect to Adolph Rupp and several people throughout the sport, there was absolutely that not twisting you're talking about. Like, we can't let this happen. This is the wrong way to play this sport by the wrong kind of people. But I don't want to dismiss entirely the idea that, there was an ethic, so to speak, about basketball since its formation. And look at it this way, like, basketball's still a relatively young sport in the 50s and 60s. It had only been around, less than 3/4 of a century.
And I think that earlier history is just interesting to bring up, right? That there was dunking that was happening in the 1930s at the Olympics. And even at the time, it was just seen as like kind of disrespectful. And so they would try to take the legs out from under the dunkers and even the playing field that way. So I think that ethic then flows into a lot of the tensions around the changing of the sport in the 50s and 60s.
When you started writing this book, did you know that it went back all the way into the 30s and that the dunking was going on way back then?
I didn't know how far back dunking went. And that was kind of one of the fun aspects of doing the research for the book. And I really teetered on the edge of that rabbit hole about driving myself crazy, trying to figure out when the first dunk actually was. And I finally, I found example after example of what might have been called the first dunk. And I finally said after a while, there's really no way I'm going to be able to find this out. Jack McCallum, who was a longtime basketball writer for Sports Illustrated, just reviewed the book in the Wall Street Journal. And he made the great point that even if you look at some of the great memorable dunks in modern basketball history, guys like Michael Jordan, Julius Erving, quote unquote, taking off from the foul line, even they are leaving their feet just inside the foul line. They're not really jumping from where we think they're jumping from. So the idea that we were ever going to pinpoint the first dunk, quote unquote, was a bit of a fool's errand. I got as close as I feel like I could. And, as Nicole said, I gave some examples there from early on in the 20s and 30s, but I don't think we're ever going to know who legitimately dunked the ball in a basketball game for the first time.
When I worked at ESPN and did 30 for 30 there, we did a little sub-series before we launched the 30 for 30 podcast called Dunkumentaries, which was all these short stories about, good name, but also some good stories. But, all these short, it actually, I'm quite proud of it. It came out nicely. But we did one about the sort of myth and the attempt to track down the first women's dunk in college basketball. And there was like this whole, I'm sure you know this story, Mike. I don't know if it's in the book, but
It is in the book. Is this Georgiana Wells?
The tape in someone's garage in West Virginia and the attempt to go and find it. We did a documentaries. I'm sure you advanced the story too, but you're right. It's like I think that's where we ended up as well. It's like it's nice to kind of inquire about this, but you're never really going to know, and that's kind of the beauty of it all, right? Because even if you say like, okay, the first recorded one was in West Virginia in this year, and we found the dusty tape in someone's garage. Like, there's no way of knowing that there weren't hundreds of people dunking elsewhere years before throughout the country, Hey, it's Jody with a word about a fellow Radiotopia show, The Recipe. So I don't know about you, but with inflation and grocery prices what they are, and the fact that it's pretty cold where I live, I am spending a lot more time in my kitchen cooking recipes for me and my family and friends. The good old-fashioned dinner party, by the way, it's coming back. Give it a shot. I think this is the year we're going to become the home cooks we were all meant to be. And one of our newer Radiotopia shows is here to help on our culinary journey. It is The Recipe with Kenji and Deb. Kenji and Deb, of course, are J. Kenji Lopez-Alt and Deb Perlman, two of the best home cooks alive. I'm sure you know Kenji's YouTube, his contributions to the New York Times recipes, Deb's iconic cooking blog, Smitten Kitchen. I actually just went to my saved recipes on the New York Times cooking app to see which of Kenji's recipes were on there, and there are a ton. I like to make his vegan chili, his Taiwanese beef noodle soup. He has a great salmon recipe, and most importantly, he's the one that really got me to learn how to scramble eggs to perfection. So, The Recipe. In each episode, Kenji and Deb talk about the essential ingredients and techniques of a beloved everyday dish, the little things that make a dish really sing. One of the things I really love about this is that they have different styles and they sometimes disagree. That makes for a great podcast, and it's kind of the beauty of cooking. You have to figure out what works for you. And The Recipe is there to help. So go ahead and check it out from Radiotopia and PRX, The Recipe with Kenji and Deb. You can listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Happy cooking. A quick word about Up First from NPR. Breaking news, as you've probably noticed, is pretty broken. You're constantly doom scrolling on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it. And maybe you feel a little bit of, I'm over it, I'm over the news. Well, if this sounds like you, I recommend that you listen to the Up First podcast from NPR. You get everything you need to know in an easy 15-minute update. Look, if you listen to this show, it is very likely that you follow the news and you care about politics, just like me. But I think one of the best choices you can make is decide how to engage with the news. And Up First is a perfect way to distill down to just the information you need to help you understand the news without getting overwhelmed and feeling that sense of news paralysis. Up First is national and international. There's facts and information, but there's also personality and analysis. Start your day every day with Up First. Change the way that you consume the news. Listen now to the Up First podcast from NPR. This day is brought to you by Quince. Now, who doesn't love the good things in life? And even though I enjoy a little luxury, it doesn't mean I can always afford it. But Quince is here to help. Quince has become my go-to for luxury essentials at affordable prices. I know we're all shivering right now, but I'm already thinking about spring and summer and refreshing my wardrobe a bit. So I'm on the Quince website right now looking at some stuff. Oh, another pair of linen pants. I have a pair of those already, but maybe a different color. There's sunglasses here I'm looking at. An organic cotton silk button-down polo sweater. If you see me rocking that this spring, please compliment it. It's very nice looking. And the best part of it all is that Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. You can get 100% Mongolian cashmere sweaters for $50, shorts, t-shirts. You can even get 14-karat gold jewelry. So now's the time. Treat yourself, restock, look good, give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday.
I wonder, can you talk about sort of like the moment when this changes? Because now in our, again, in our modern framework, we can't imagine basketball without dunking. I mean, there's slam dunk contests. I mean, it's such a huge part of the game that a game in which no one is dunking is a game which doesn't seem very exciting to watch. How does that evolution, how do you go from like no one's dunking to, okay, you can dunk now?
Well, there are a couple seminal moments there, Kellie. I think one of the first ones is, and I think Nicole referenced this, the 1936 Olympics, the run-up to the Summer Olympics in Berlin. That's the first Olympics that has basketball as part of the competition. And when we think of the 36 Olympics, we usually think of, it's in Berlin, it's Hitler, it's Jesse Owens, it's the boys in the boat, it's all these stories that have become part of our national sports lexicon. But Joe Fortenberry from Happy, Texas, had actually been seen...
All that is made up, Mike. Nice try.
Had actually been seen dunking the ball in a layup line at an exhibition game at Madison Square Garden by Arthur Daly of the New York Times. And Daly wrote a piece about it in which he referred to Fortenberry dropping the ball through the basket as if he were dunking a roll into a cup of coffee. And that's really the most concrete connection that's made between basketball and the term dunk. And once Daly uses it, you see it more frequently in the language around basketball. Then you get to 1955, which is kind of something I postulate in the book. That's the year that Wilt Chamberlain is in his senior year of high school at Overbrook High School and is a national phenom for what he's doing at the high school level. And at the same time, Bill Russell is a junior at the University of San Francisco, and he leads the Dons to the NCAA championship. And those guys really take the sport above the rim. They show what's coming here. And more than anything, they show that, and Julius Erving really takes this to the next level in the 70s, that the individual flair and the way a player stands out for dunking the ball and for playing with that kind of grace and athleticism above the rim isn't necessarily separate from his team's success.
Yeah.
That you can have players like this and they're showing the old guard is wrong. You don't have to be five players on the, in the old line from Hoosiers, five players on the floor functioning as one single unit. You can have Bill Russell swatting shots away and Wilt Chamberlain jamming the ball and Julius Erving flying through the air, and your team can still win a whole bunch of games, and those guys can be great teammates.
That's the thing that's always sort of struck me as a bit of a paradox in here, is that, you think of the dunk as this sort of thing that's largely about flair, but it is also the most efficient way to do the thing that you're trying to do, which is put the ball through the hoop.
Yeah.
Right. And it's no surprise. I'm frankly surprised it didn't happen a lot earlier, that people were just like, wait a minute, what if I just close the space between the ball and the rim to zero and I just dropped it in? Doesn't that feel like the point here? So, it's that tension, I agree, Mike is a huge part of this. Let's go to this moment again where it gets banned and the larger context, and then I want to talk about sort of your whole sweep of dunking history.
Sure.
But we've talked about the justification that the Rupps of the world give for this ban. Do people see it for that, or do people see it for what it really is? I mean, the press calls it the Lew Alcindor rule, right? I think people see what's going on here, right?
Yeah, there are people who see it. It's at the grassroots level where the obviousness of what's going on is most apparent. You hear small college coaches and people who are around the playgrounds in the city saying, look, this is supposedly about Alcindor, but what's happening here is they're trying to keep all of us down, because they can see what's coming. So it becomes apparent after a while, especially because college basketball, in part because of Alcindor and the UCLA dynasty, is reaching levels of popularity that are so widespread throughout the country that come the mid to late 70s, college basketball games are outdrawing the NBA on national television.
Wow.
And what ends up happening, and I get into this in the book, is that you have a player, say such as David Thompson at North Carolina State, who really is a precursor to Irving and Jordan, who is to this day regarded as the best player in ACC history. And that's saying something. You're talking about the conference with Duke and North Carolina, with Michael Jordan and Christian Laettner and James Worthy, and he's considered the best. And he plays above the rim. He's 6'4" and can fly, like an airplane, and he can't dunk. He's not allowed to dunk. And at some point, these people involved with the sport say to themselves, what are we doing? We are holding our own game back by not allowing a player like Thompson to show what he can do and to increase the excitement. There are a lot of coaches when the ban goes into effect who are pointing this out. A guy like Guy Lewis at the University of Houston, who had always recruited very athletic players and who, of course, creates the Phi Slamma Jamma team in the early 1980s at Houston with Clyde Drexler and Akeem Olajuwon. He says, this is moronic. This is idiotic that we're banning the dunk. We're going to limit ourselves and what our sport can be. Lou Carnesecca at St. John's feels the same way. He says when the ban is finally lifted in 1976, he says the ban was the worst thing in the United States since the Volstead Act, which banned alcohol. So
which we've done episodes on, and to that point. Well, actually, okay. Let me see if I can't pick up on that metaphor. We've talked about how on the Volstead Act, people were still just finding ways to drink regardless, and so it occurs to me, I've never really gotten a chance to ask someone, what was the workaround? Were people just going up to the very, very moment where they would potentially dunk, but then just finger roll it in or drop it in? In practice, how did people toe with that line and that definition of ban?
That's exactly what they would do. They would drop the ball through the hoop. David Thompson and a teammate of his, Monty Tao, the team's point guard at NC State, basically rose the alley-oop to the prominence that it enjoys now in basketball. And they did it without Thompson being able to dunk. He quite literally dunked one time in his entire college career.
So he would just tap it in?
He would tap it in, right. Or he would just drop it through the hoop. And he finally dunked for his last basket in a regular season game at NC State. He got a breakaway, and he just decided, you know what, the hell with this. And he threw down a windmill tomahawk dunk and got called for a technical foul. And the crowd went nuts at Reynolds Coliseum, and nobody cared because it was almost like
totally worth it.
Yeah, it was like he was showing the entire world what might have been. If you would allow me to be the player I could have been.
But Kellie, Niki, we talk about this on the show all the time. It shows the absurdity of racism and the way that you have to write these absurd draw these totally arbitrary, absurd lines. That all of a sudden people aren't technically dunking, but they're basically doing 99% of it anyway. And these kinds of players are still taking over the game.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says that. He's like, listen, this reeks of discrimination. Most of the players who are doing this are black, and so to make this ban, you can't separate out the ban from the color of the players that are doing this.
Yeah, and to your point, Kellie, I try to get access to the NCAA's presidential archives. Walter Byers was the name of the president of the NCAA at this time. And I contacted the NCAA to try to ask them to allow me to see all of Byers' papers during his tenure as president, because I wanted to see if there was a memo, a letter, something that said on paper, this is why we're doing this. And the NCAA would not allow me to see anything.
And you know why.
Well, I said that to them in an email directly. I said, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to include our email exchange verbatim in the book, and I'll allow readers to draw their own conclusions about why you wouldn't let me see the archival material. And the NCAA never responded. Still haven't.
Wow.
All right, let's take a step back here and, talk to us a little bit about the dunk in general as a cultural phenomenon, as an athletic phenomenon. I mean, what is the thing that you most love about that act of sports? So, it's to me one of the single greatest, sort of most elegant, most moving kind of acts in all of sports. But like, what drew you in first?
There's so much tied up in it, Jody. I mean, it gets you into, when you really think about it, it gets you into the psychology of it, the idea of one athlete asserting him or herself in an act of domination over another. I mean, there's the history that we've spent the last few minutes talking about with respect to race and kind of the arc of the country and its changes over time. And the last thing, and I say this explicitly in the book, it's just fun. Yeah. It's fun. And that to me is one of the, I don't want to say it's a bad part of basketball now, but it's a disappointing part of basketball, particularly at the NBA level now, is that the dunk has become as much about function, if not more about function than it is about form. It is, as Jody hinted, in the age of efficiency and statistical analysis, the dunk really has become kind of nothing more than just the most efficient way to put the ball in the basket. Even players themselves see it that way. And we saw this just the other night. We're recording this a couple days after the slam dunk contest. And it's really kind of lost its juice because the dunk used to provide a sense of wonder to sports and to basketball. How does Julius Erving, how does Michael Jordan, how does Dominique Wilkins do that? And we've seen it for so many years now that I wonder if it's lost some of its ability to surprise us and make us feel a sense of pure wonder about what's happening on a basketball court.
Yeah. Yeah, though I would argue that there's still those moments, and I think like players like Anthony Edwards are kind of carrying that mantle, but where it's just like, oh my God, nothing sort of shocks you and surprises you and delights you in a sort of a quick flash the way that a great in-game dunk does. And that magic is still there.
Yeah, it's just not there as frequently. And to be honest, in an age of social media where players don't want to become a meme, I think one of the
things...
getting
dunked on.
Right, they don't want to get dunked on, which is one of the things that makes a dunk great, is when Michael Jordan throws it down over Charles Smith of the Knicks in the playoff game, that added energy is there, and it's not there as frequently anymore because players don't want to be made fun of on social media.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right. Yeah.
That's wild. Can I just say, I'm pretty partial to the three-pointer. I just think there's something about it that, like, when you're down and people start dunking, or not dunking, but throwing down threes, and I'm like, yes, that's what gets me more excited than anything. Maybe it's the point value. I don't know. But I love a good three-pointer. Just
yeah, I love it too, Kellie. I do. I worry that the sport has become kind of an all-or-nothing proposition. Now, at the NBA level, at least, it is so dependent on the three-point shot that I think the sport has lost some excitement. I really do. Because that's what we love about sports, right? Is the idea that we are seeing men and women transcend the limitations of the rules and their own physicality, I guess you'd say. And I wonder if basketball is missing a little bit of that now.
All right. Well, look, I had a month-and-a-half long stretch sophomore year of college where I could dunk a volleyball. And it was one of the greatest feelings of my life. I've been chasing that feeling ever since. But listeners, don't take it from me that the dunk is special. You should read this book, which is a whole justification for how significant and special the dunk is. I just did have to kind of mention that I could once dunk a volleyball.
Just want it on the record.
Yeah, just want it on the record. But Mike Sielski of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the book is called Magic in the Air, the Myth, the Mystery, and the Soul of the Slam Dunk. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for writing this book. And thanks for me for being such a great voice for Philadelphia sports over the years.
I appreciate it so much. It was a pleasure to be with you guys.
Nicole Hammer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.